All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Innovation Grant webinar. I'm Zach Bruink, the Chief Operating Officer here at the League, and we're really pleased that you've taken some time to learn more about the Innovation Grant that is available to us. I've got some League staff that are also going to be joining us, so perhaps if they want to say hello, Tony Herker, our Government Affairs Director, who has been very involved in the iterations within the Innovation Grant program. And so we're excited about this opportunity and the prospects of funding priorities at the local level within our membership. And we really hope that we can make the most of this money. So please consult the resources, and we're here as a resource for you in case you have questions. Tony, do you want to say hello? See, you're off mute
Hi,
there.
everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to have Valia with us to kind of walk through the application and how you can get involved in the innovation grant, and also hear from you on where you are in the process and what your plans are. So, really excited to have the webinar today. And thanks, Valia, for being with us.
Thanks, Tony. Before we dive in and introduce our guests, we've got a couple of polls here we want to get your participation on. So we'll go ahead and launch our first poll. Looks like there's three questions all on the same poll. The first question is, are you planning to apply for an innovation grant? Yes, no, or maybe. So if you could go ahead and fill that one out. The second question is, if so, which category? There's a number of categories, sort of informally or at least eligible activities that can be funded with an innovation grant. So if you're planning on applying, indicate there police or public safety would be an example, technology, administration, and so on. And the third question we've got up there is, if you are a recipient of a planning grant, the first round that occurred earlier this year, if you were a recipient, are you in a position to apply this round? And we'd like to hear about that. So if yes, great. If no, your plan's recommendations are not being pursued, or perhaps you didn't indicate that there was a viable opportunity before you, or you just won't be finished with the planning grant. And we'll talk a little bit about the timelines associated with the grant here when Valia goes through the overview, but we just kind of wanted to get a pulse check from folks. So glad we've got folks still joining us. You're in the right place for the Innovation Grant webinar. We are recording this as a reminder. You do have full control over your mute buttons today. And so if you do have a question, we'll get into at the tail end of our conversation. So our plan today is to have Valia speak about the program, and then we'll get into a roundtable, which we won't record, for people to have questions or discuss things that they're working on. We'd love to hear from you. If you are working on a grant, how is the process going? Aside from any questions, do you have any advice for your peers who might be thinking about applying for a grant? There's a good 50 of the folks that have responded have said that they might be applying for a grant. So if you are applying, let's share the wisdom with those that might be. This is your space today to talk about the Innovation Grant webinar. So we'll go ahead and end the poll in 3, 2, 1. Again, there's a couple questions there, and I'll share the results. And looks like 32% of you today that have joined us are planning to apply for a grant. Just a couple of you are not currently planning to apply, and the lion's share of you, 65%, are in the maybe category. So hopefully we'll get to some of your questions, hesitations, concerns, to get you to a place where you might be in a better position to apply. We've got the open-ended question here. Under which category are people applying? Of course, it's going to ask me to sign in and to get those results. We'll go ahead, and the third question there is specific to receiving a planning grant. Looks like a number of you, about 75%, are not finished with the planning grant analysis. We'll talk about the timelines again associated with this funding opportunity that might get you to a place where you might be an applicant. So without any further ado, I'll drop the summary of the number two questions in the chat here as soon as Valia gets started. But we'll go ahead and introduce our guest, Valia Foy, who is the Division Administrator at State and Local Finance at the Department of Revenue. We're really pleased to have her join us today to walk through a program that the department has been spending a considerable amount of time and resources on. There were a lot of planning grant recipients the first round, and Department of Revenue staff worked really diligently with our members and even with the league on an application. So we thank the department staff for all that they've done to get us to this point. And we're now to the prime time, Valia, right? We've got the big funding opportunity standing before us, and we'll go ahead and kick it over to you. You should have full screen share privileges. So
All right.
you're
Thanks,
ready.
Zach.
Thank you.
And thank you again for having me in this space with your membership. We've been presenting quite a lot on innovation grants, trying to spread the message, provide overviews to make sure we're addressing questions. And so today I'll do a quick overview because I feel like we've done that a few times. So I won't spend as much time there, but I do want to walk you all through the form to give you a good idea of the type of information that you're going to have to provide if you choose to apply for the grant program. And hopefully, I'm super excited about the roundtable at the end to see if we can address any questions. I will let you know we did receive quite a couple of questions in the last week that we're reviewing, and trying to make determinations on. So those we're working on our end, but hopefully we can address your questions today. Let me share and just give me a thumbs up, Zach or Tony, if you could see my screen. Is it showing the right screen?
30 seconds. I'm gonna go home. I'm sure 30 seconds.
I don't know that.
We were there, Valia. If you hit it one more time, it should happen. And just a reminder to folks, you have full control over your mute button. So if you are uncertain, double check to make sure you stay muted throughout the duration. Thank you. We can see your screen.
Yep. All right. Okay. Let's jump in then. Let me get us going. So Zach mentioned, Tony and Evan working hard on some legislative changes for the Innovation Grant Program. And if you all are kind of following this, we were ready to launch the larger Innovation Grant Program this summer in July. And then we had Act 15, which was largely based on your feedback, which we think did make some beneficial updates to the Innovation Grant Program, but it was significantly modified. So I will kind of go over where we are right now, and that form has launched in September. So we're about a month into it. The form is available and out there for you all to apply. So high level, there's still $300 million available. It's for Wisconsin counties, municipalities, and tribes, and the purpose remains the same. You can apply for a grant if a county or municipality or tribe, federally recognized tribe, transfers a service, one of the allowable services or duties, to another county, municipality, tribe, nonprofit, or private entity. So essentially, the pillars that you want to remember, the county, municipality, or tribe that's transferring the service, they have to provide the service in the prior year. Pillar 2, it needs to be one of the allowable services or duties. And pillar 3, it needs to be transferring to one of those eligible entities. So another county, municipality, tribe, nonprofit, or private entity. So that's the main focus and the main requirements. The allowable services have stayed the same and they're visible here. There's a broad range of services and you do not have to transfer an entire service category. You could transfer a duty within that service category. The first 3 that are highlighted here, essentially law enforcement, fire protection, and emergency services, they're highlighted because statutorily we have to provide priority to them. So if we receive a grant application in those 3 service categories, we'll consider those first. They essentially will get assigned a higher ranking for our auditors during the review process. But as you can see, like I said, a broad range of options and opportunity here as far as service categories. The contractor agreement, it's also referred to as the innovation plan. So in statute under this program, the innovation plan is essentially the contractor agreement to transfer the services. And so you might hear us refer to the innovation plan. Again, that's just going to be your contractor agreement. And in statute, there are certain things that are required to be included in that contractor agreement. So I kind of listed the most important kind of high level things here. You have to, of course, outline the service or duty that's being transferred. The signature date of that contractor agreement needs to be on or after November 13th of 2024. The transfer effective date needs to be listed. The length of the contract, that's one of the things that changed with Act 15. So now it's a minimum of 3 years. Previously, it was required 6 years. So now it's a minimum of 3 years for the length of the contract. And then there's various cost information that needs to be included. So for all of the local government participants, they have to provide the cost of this, the cost to provide the service in the calendar year prior to the transfer. You have to provide the cost to provide the service in the first year after the transfer. And then you have to provide the total cost to provide the service for the duration of that contractor agreement. So it does need to have an end date, right? So if it's a 3-year, you'd be estimating, here's the duration, here's the estimate of total cost for the duration of the project. Those items are included statutorily. And then the last major thing that is required for that contractor agreement is the allocation of grant funds. So if you all are approved for an innovation grant, you will be telling us how to allocate that annual payment amongst the local government participants. So that's one of the things that is required in the contractor agreement. And then Section 79038 is the section where these items are outlined, if you wanted to refer to it. Zach said that he shared the Innovation Grant webpage, and in our fact sheet, we also have a complete list of the items that are required for the innovation plan as well. The 115% cost increase limitation. This was new with Act 15, but if you recall, there used to be a 10% cost savings requirement, and that has now been repealed and taken away. So at a very high level, you went from being required to transfer a service and reduce your cost by 10%, but now it's transfer a service and just don't exceed an increase of 15%. So high level should be easier to qualify and comply with, but I'll explain this 115 cost limitation. So essentially during the grant award period, the total cost that we receive from you for all the local government participants, so counties, munis, and tribes, transferor, transferee, so on both sides of the transfer, as I said, you're going to be giving us those costs before the transfer occurs, for the calendar year before the transfer occurs. And so that's what we're using as a basis for this requirement. So for each year that we go through and we distribute a payment for you all for the program participants, we will be checking to ensure the total cost to provide that same service that's been transferred hasn't exceeded 115% of your pre-transfer cost. So we have to do that certification. We won't do it the first year. We're going to distribute payments for the first year, but we'll do it the subsequent years. So potentially years, payments 2 through 5, we would do it for. Just making sure that you comply with that 115% cost increase limitation. If you don't, we're required to withhold that following year's payment, and then we can check again the next year. So it's not to say you're kicked out of the program. It's an each year individual kind of check that we need to do. So there could be where you miss out a payment in 1 year and you're able to attain a payment in the following year. That is a possibility. Zach and or Tony, please call out if there are questions and you want me to stop. I'm totally fine responding as we go to.
Thanks, Billy. We do have a question on the cost limit, and it's framed this way: is the 115% cost limit net costs or gross? And it goes on to ask or clarify, in other words, if 2 fire departments consolidate, do their revenues, EMS fees, factor into the cost calculation?
So that's a tricky question. So the focus that we will capture, so if 2 fire departments in this example are consolidating, we are going to capture what are your fire department total cost in the year before the transfer. So we are solely looking at those expenditures, right? We're looking at the cost, we're looking at the expenditures. So each year, we will be looking at total expenses in year one, well, I should say year one compared to kind of pre. We'll be looking at total expenses each year. So when you say EMS fees increasing, I'm assuming that that's factored into your cost that you have to pay. Am I making a right assumption?
It brings together expenses and revenues, and I think you just clarified it that we're really your view on this is purely on the expenditure side, and so it's not a cost net of revenues. It's
Right,
purely on
right.
the gross expenses of delivering the service.
Exactly, exactly.
Great.
Another
And if we
question in
didn't
there.
capture the question, feel free to follow up with a clarification. We've got another question in there regarding the cost increase limitation. Does it build a factor of inflation from year to year, or must this remain static through multiple years?
By statute, it is static. There's nothing that considers inflation, there's no CPI factor or anything like that. It is just written as 115% of those pre-transfer costs.
Thank you. That's the last
Mhm.
question at the moment.
Okay. All right. Well, feel free to keep throwing them out there. I appreciate your help, Zach. The next portion of this are the payment distributions, and that did change slightly with Act 15. So the grant award period we have exists through June 30th of 2030. We are working to distribute the first payment by June 30th of 2026. So essentially, we have the ability to distribute 5 annual payments for the program. So that's the maximum that a recipient would be eligible for, five annual payments. The annual grant payment calculation has been simplified. So now, no matter who the participants are, we will be looking at the local government participants for the transferors, so the folks that are transferring the service. And we're going to take their total cost pre-transfer, that same amount, like that same concept that we were just thinking of, the cost before the transfer in the calendar year before the transfer. We'll say, what's your total cost? And we will take 25% of that, and that will be the annual payment. So as it states here, 25% of the total cost of providing the service for those local government transferors in the calendar year prior to the transfer. Okay. Um, the number of annual payments depends on a couple of things. The first thing is it depends on the date of our first grant payment distribution. And like I said, we are working to distribute by June 30th of 2026, so that should not be an issue. The second thing is the duration of the service or duty transfer. So if you have in your contractor agreement, if your innovation plan is a 3-year transfer, you could be eligible for 3 annual payments, and that would get you to 75% of that total cost. If you have something that is 5 years, could be eligible for 5 years. Essentially, then you have the ability to receive 125%, right, of your total cost pre-transfer. If you have something that's 7 years, which is totally fine, there's nothing to say you have to limit it. If you have something that's 7 years, you would still just get a maximum of 5 years. So I think in our discussions, the biggest thing to consider here is that 115% cost increased. How many years can you guarantee that you could abide by that 115% cost increase? I've heard some say 3 years is reasonable. We could do that for 3 years. Then you want to focus on the 3-year time limit. If you could manage it for 5, then shoot for the maximum of 5 annual payments. But that's how we'll be calculating the payment distributions. In the top right, you can see there is still that limitation that we cannot distribute more than $10 million in a single year to one recipient. So that is a cap as such that we won't exceed. Any questions on payment distributions that popped up?
I think we've addressed the ones that are here. We'll Mark Roloff's question, we may want to hold for the end. Yeah, why don't you go ahead and continue, Valia? We'll come back with
Okay.
these.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't have the chat up, so I appreciate your help. Okay, I do know that some of you have seen these before, so I'm just going to run through the numbers quickly so you have an idea of just simply how it works. So numbers wise, in both of these scenarios that I'll show you really quick, we have a service transfer, a duration of 6 years. We're assuming that we'll get that first grant payment out by June 30th of 2026. And so just consider those two factors when we're looking at these. So we have two communities. Before the transfer, one community is paying $8,000 to provide a service. The other community is paying $10,000 to provide a service. And as you can see here in our scenario, community A is transferring a service to community B. Okay. So the total cost for local government participants on both ends is $18,000. So we'll establish that just in our heads right away. The total cost is $18,000, and we'll come back to that amount. The annual grant payment, we'll look at the left side. Who are the transferors in this situation? So we're only going to look at community A's $8,000 when we're calculating the annual payment. So 25% of 8,000, that's how we determine $2,000 is the annual grant payment. In this scenario, they are eligible for 5 years. So $2,000 multiplied by 5 years, they could receive a total of $10,000 in total for the grant payments. The cost increase limitation then that we would be looking at each year to make sure that the cost didn't exceed. We take that total cost, that $18,000, we multiply that by 115%, and that's where we get the 20,700. So each year, so kind of like during that 5-year period, as we're distributing payments, you want to make sure that the total cost amongst both parties combined total cost don't exceed the $20,700. So that's a simpler scenario. And then just a quick multi one. In this one, we have 3 communities transferring a service to one. Same rules apply. What you see here are the pre-transfer cost, and I kept the parameters of the 6-year transfer and making the first one by June of 2026 the same. So amongst all 4 parties, when we add up the amounts, the total cost for all 4 parties is $260,000. Okay. When we do the annual grant payment, we look at the transferors, who are the local government transferors. So all 3 of these have a combined total cost of $160,000. We take 25% of that, which is $40,000. So that is the annual grant payment. Again, they're eligible for the max 5 years. So 40,000 times 5 years. It's a total distribution of $200,000. And then when we're looking at the cost increase limitation, we look at total cost both sides. So kind of back up to that row 1. So 260,000 times 115%. Each year, they would want to make sure that their total costs combined don't exceed 299,000. So those are a quick breakdown of the numbers. Any questions from that, Zach?
I'm not seeing a question roll on either of the 2 scenarios specifically, but there's a question in here about the question is framed. So what happens when the grant runs out and the municipality can't afford to bring these services back into their own budget? My reading of that is that both entities must currently be performing these services. There's not an eligible use for services that are currently not being performed. Do you have another take on that question than what I just responded to it?
Well, yeah, I mean, the services that you all provide, you're deeming them important, right? They're critical services that you're providing for your residents. And so I would hope that these transfers, you're establishing relationships and these transfers continue. If these 3 entities that you see on the screen are transferring a service, to a community, and let's just say, collectively they've been paying 160,000, maybe they'll pay 160,000, maybe they'll pay more contracted each year. I would hope that those contracts continue. Right? If you have an end date of 5 years, are you going to renew that contract because you've established this relationship, it's working well, rather than taking it back on? The grant payment that you receive doesn't have to be used towards, these services that you're working on. If I'm a community, let's just say C. I'm community C here, and I'm paying $30,000 to provide a service right now. I'm going to pay that, or maybe slightly more, maybe slightly less for community D to do it. For the next 5 years, I'm going to get a portion of this 200,000 that I can use however I see fit. I can use it for a separate project. I can use it for another item. What we've cautioned for and what we keep putting various places, that portion of 200,000 that you're going to get in this example, don't use it for ongoing operations. Don't use it for personnel. Don't and unnecessarily use it for operations because it is temporary funding, and you don't want to, I'll just use the word unnecessarily, reduce your levy limit because of it, right? So identify, okay, we're going to have these extra funds that are coming in for a portion of time. How can we use those? And then, the funds end, right? And you still have this relationship, this contract for services, and whether you keep that going or bring it back on. My hope is that most keep it going, that it works out and most keep it going. I hope that addresses the question.
Yeah, thanks, Valia. Yeah, you're right. We definitely want to encourage not using one-time grant money for continuing obligations or a service that might end up becoming a continuing obligation for a budget.
Mhm.
Tony looks like she's staying pace with some of the questions in here. I think we are right. There was one, Gary's question Tony responded to, but I'll just elevate it. And that was specific to the grant is available to the entity that shares the service. The question is, what about the recipient that is paying for the service? Really that's for each scenario to be worked out. And Tony had indicated that it should be stated and worked out in the contract that's being negotiated and then ultimately provided to the Department of Revenue. But that does take us through our questions, Valia, so carry on.
Okay, will do. Thank you. Thank you both. All right, so the Form SL 405, that is available within the MyDOR government account system. It's set up like all of our other forms in MyDOR Gov, so you'll be very familiar with the layout. It was made available last month, like I mentioned, and it is due March 31st of 2026. So this very first part looks exactly like our normal forms, right? This is the intro page. You have a link to the form instructions, common questions, and then you click start filing, and that will bring you to section A. So the very first section just kind of goes through what are some of the basics of the innovation plan or the contractor agreement that you have set up. Is it signed by all parties? We'll ask that question. We'll ask you to attach it. You can see on line 3, it's enter in a project name. That just helps us name the project as we go back and forth and may have questions for you. The next section will ask about the service category. So select the service that's being transferred. The list of services that I had on the prior slide will be listed here as a drop down. And then you will indicate if you're transferring all or part of the service. And if it's part of the service, such as a specific duty, another field will pop up and just have you enter in what's that duty. So we're just getting a feel for what is it that you're transferring. The bottom half of section A is more about dates. So confirm that your service transfer is for at least 3 years, yes or no. Enter in the signature date, you'll enter in that, enter in the actual effective date. There are some fields that will populate as you go through. So this field specifically, if you have a service transfer that is for 2025, the calendar year of 2024 will populate right there. And that's basically just kind of identifying for you, that's the year that we're going to focus on for total cost. If your effective date is 25, we're going to be looking for your 2024 total cost information as you go through the form. And it'll show up the different places in the form as well. The last line 9 is when does your contract or agreement expire? When does your service transfer end per your contract? And then we try to estimate, okay, looks like it's a duration of 5 years. Here's the maximum number of payments that you'd be eligible for if you were to be approved for the grant program. So that is section A. One thing I will call out about this, if you have a transfer agreement that's effective in 2026, there is 2025 cost information then that you will have to provide. So you won't be able to apply until 2025 is over. So if you have an effective date of 2026, just keep that on your radar, that you'll have to wait until that first quarter of 2026 to actually apply. And that's what we're hearing from some. Some are waiting with effective dates in 2026. So just calling that out here. Section B, you're going to identify who are the participants, who are the parties to the contract. So we have a section for transferors. You can, if you're doing of course, a county, municipality, or a tribe, they're all drop down lists because we have all of that information. You can see in my example here, the transferee I listed as a nonprofit. So if you're entering in a nonprofit or a private entity, you just have to enter in the name and then their federal employer ID number. So they're fine. But you'll just list as many transferors and or transferees as exist that are party to the contract on this section, and that's all we're looking for. And then we'll populate more sections. So section C is digging into the transferors. So for each transferor that you list, you'll have a section C1, a C2, a C3 for as many that are needed. And we'll be confirming the items that are here that are on the screen. So we'll confirm this transferor provided the service in the prior calendar year, which you can see 2024 kind of populates based off of what you entered in section A. What were their total costs pre-transfer, attach any documentation. What are their specific costs for the first year after the transfer and then for the entire term. So that's what it's going to ask for each transferor because we need that information and we're trying to break that down. And then in section D, as in David, those are going to be the transferees. And so it's a little bit simpler where we're just asking for their total cost pre-transfer on their side and then attaching documentation. But the form will function the same. As many transferees as you enter and list in that section, you'll have a D1, a D2, a D3, etc. So that's how that will work. Oh, that jumped on me fast. So section E is the total cost. This is basically summarizing what you've entered in the prior section. So it has the cost information that you entered for the transferors for that year before the transfer. This is what we're focusing on. And then the transferees, the cost information. And we're asking you to confirm that this is right. If it's not right, you can go back and update the information that you've entered. Section F is new after Act 15. So Section F, we have a cost limitation portion where we're saying here are the total costs based off of what you reported in the prior section. Here's the total cost that you reported for the local government participants. Here's your 115% cost limitation amount that you don't want to exceed each year, and then confirm, do you certify that you can maintain this, and not exceed this cost limitation requirement? Do you certify that you understand it, essentially? So you're doing a yes or no there. And then on the bottom of section F, we're asking some feeler questions that will help us kind of rank and score the innovation grant. So one is about, improving the quality of the service and or accessibility. Another is any process improvements that are being implemented in result of the service transfer. And then another is if you've used innovation planning grant funds to develop the innovation plan that you're submitting. So if you select yes to any of these questions here down at the bottom, there will be a larger kind of text field that populates that allows you to enter information, and then you can attach documentation as well. So the form is really dynamic based off of what you're answering. You might hit a yes, and then you'll have an entry field, that kind of thing, as you go through. Section G is the last kind of main section. I'll say that, then I'll click and there'll be another one, but I think section G is the last. So grant allocation, this is where we will show you, okay, here are the local government transferors that were listed. Here's the total. And here's your anticipated annual grant payment. So we're calculating that for you. What we're asking you to do down here is to tell us how to distribute that annual grant payment if you are approved. So you have the ability to do it by dollar amount or by percentage. And after you select one, you'll have a little chart and it'll list the local government participants, the transferors and the transferees, because we will pay any local government participant on either side. And you're telling us how to split that payment up. In this example, $17,500. So you can identify how to split that payment up on this section. And then the last one is just the prepare a signature section. So just who's submitting the form, who can we contact with questions? So those are the main bits. That's the form at a high level. Any questions come up from the form?
Really, I'm not seeing any questions specific to the form. There is a question in here that goes back to the highest costs aspect of the application, and that it's framed this way. If we as a village are transferring our public safety to the county, do we need their previous year costs on their providing services to the entire county, or do we need the cost of just how much it was for them to provide comparable services to the individual municipalities? So, an order of scale, how would you advise the potential applicant on reporting what the costs were associated with the entity A, we'll call it, which is the county in that
That's
scenario?
a really good question. Ooh, that's a really good question. I
Yes.
like that.
Thinking as much.
Right. So let's see. So if I'm community A, I'm a municipality and I'm transferring EMS to the county. Essentially, I would assume that they were not providing service to our area beforehand, right? So they would provide the total cost of the municipality providing the service. And yes, I think the county in that example would provide the total cost of them providing the service. And it would be the transferred service. So the statute is written to say, provide the cost of providing the transferred service or duty in that year before. So if it's just a duty that you can identify and hone in onto, then maybe the county provided some, a duty and they can kind of, I don't want to, what's the word? Narrow down their cost for that duty. But if it's that general service category of EMS, I think it would be all, because the way that I'm thinking about this, they didn't actually provide the service to the municipality before the transfer, right? So they wouldn't have anything to report, if I'm thinking about that correctly. Please follow up if I'm not, but that's how I think about it. What's the service that's being transferred, and that's what they're going to give us as far as total cost.
Thank you. Yeah, you give a nod to service. There's a service slash duty in a lot of the language. And so extent that thinking about it in the form of what the county's duty might have been if they were able or had been providing that service. So that's a really great question. And I think
Yeah, that is a really good question. I
suffice to
might
say,
add that to our common questions. That's a good one.
yeah,
I'm
great.
making notes.
And there is a general email box. I'll drop the link in the chat as well. For these types of questions, it's lgs@wisconsin.gov. There was another question in here specific to having a sample contract or agreement. I know we've gotten requests for these. I would ask if folks have an existing contract or agreement that you're willing to share with Mike. I'd encourage you to do so if you feel pretty confident in it. I know at the league we don't have a sample contract or agreement, but Valia, how would you respond to that question?
Yeah, we do not have a sample contract or agreement either. I know that a lot of the times, from what I understand, a lot goes into those contracts, right? More than just the eight or nine required items that are in there for innovation grant. So we're expecting to see maybe some pretty detailed information in those innovation plans, but just trying to find the required items that we have. So yeah, if anyone is willing to share that, that would be helpful. We don't have anything that we've created for those purposes.
Yeah. And if you care to share them with the league, again, we'd be happy to make them available to folks as we get requests for them. Feel free to send them directly to me or Tony. Jordan's got a question in here specific to, can we go back to prior years? We had a staff member on payroll during a period in 2024, then contracted with a third party for that service 24 to 25 and beyond. The question is, can we use that in the calculation, or which number are they using in the calculation?
I guess I would ask in that situation, what's the actual service that they're transferring? If you're talking about, whatever this employee was specifically working on, maybe their admin, I don't know. If that contract was signed after that November 13th, it's the 13th, right? November 13th of 2024, then maybe that would be something that would be eligible. Um, but yeah, I think I probably have a couple more follow-ups to answer that question.
That makes sense. Next is a follow-up question here from Kale about the DOR updating the notice date. Will there be any change in the notice date from 8/1, say 2025, or is it going to be retaining the 11/13/2024 date?
Yeah, November 13th, 2024 is the date tied to the admin rule development. So right now, that date is the date unless law changes.
Thank you. Another question here specific to equipment costs. How do they factor in? For example, we're working on an IT services transfer. The transferor purchased a server in the year prior to the transfer. Would that cost count toward their eligible expenses?
Hmm. I think that's going to depend on um, it's going to depend on your financing and how you do your accounting. So I've had a couple of conversations with auditors, too detailed of conversations that I didn't really want to get pulled into. But I think it really is about like what are the costs, what are the expenses that your actual, I for lack of a better word, actualizing, right? What are you realizing in that year? So we talked about, if it's accrual-based accounting, there might be a situation where you're just including depreciation and financing interest, but then it just got really detailed. So I would encourage them to email us that question so we could try to figure out, because I feel like there was too many, every example that we had, there were too many, how are you doing your financing? How do you do your accounting? There are a lot of criteria that we were evaluating and answering those questions.
Yeah, every question might invite three more, but to get you to a point of application, I think it's worth asking. There's
Absolutely,
no stupid
absolutely.
questions here. Another question specific to libraries. The community currently pays into a joint library system. If they transferred the service to a countywide system, would they qualify for 25% of the previous year's costs? So it's currently in a joint agreement looking to transfer, looking to move its service from the joint system to the countywide system.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think a couple of things. So I would go back to those three pillars, right? So it sounds like if you're in a joint system, maybe you're paying somehow for that joint system. I don't know who provides the service when you say a joint system. As long as it's not the county, then I would say you're currently paying someone to do that service. It's a different person, right? So you're providing the service in the prior year. A library service would be one of the eligible categories under the service categories. So I think that you would pass that second one. And if you're transferring to a new party, right now you're transferring to the county. I think based off of that high level and some assumptions that I just made, that would be something that's eligible that we would consider. But if you want to follow up and kind of share like who participates and provides the joint library service right now, that might be helpful just to confirm the county is not already participating in providing that service, right? But if making the assumption that they're not, it seems like that would be an eligible innovation plan to pursue and consider. And I know that one might get lifted a little bit faster, and so you would be able to apply, right? But before the March 31st, 2026. So if you want to explore that one further and send us more details, please feel free. We can evaluate it further, but I think it could. I think it could work.
Great. Another question in here. Jim, yours is specific to some variable costs year to year for the transferee, if I'm not mistaken. In reading that, I am not certain. You may want to follow up with local government services directly on that. I think that one's a pretty nuanced question. Another question, does contracting a service to a third party qualify to be eligible for the grant? I think it depends on Valia, be depending on what type of service we're talking about first and foremost, followed by the financial and the other qualifying factors specific to who it might be transferring to. The
Right. So you could
service,
be Absolutely, absolutely. You're going down the right path. So is it an eligible, allowable service or duty? Would be one of those questions, right? But if you are, let's just say, I'm a town, I'm contracting with, someone to provide, let's just say EMS, right? You're paying to provide that service beforehand. And now you're going to change and I'm going to contract to provide it with someone else. That is eligible. You're providing the service, and the year before you're paying for it, via contract. So you're providing it if it's an allowable service category or a duty, and then you're transferring it to another. You just want to be aware of, it has to be a different entity that you're transferring it to, right? It cannot be the same entity like renewing a contract or something like that. But just because it's a third party, just because you're contracting beforehand, that doesn't make it ineligible. So it would still be worth looking into.
There's a question here about end date, and if the contract does automatically renew, aside from cancellation due to a breach of contract or notice of termination, how do they answer the question about the end date? Is it specific to the end date in the period, setting aside the automatic renewal, or do they, further they clarify if the intention of the contract is to be long-term, beyond 5 years?
I guess I would use that renewal point, right? If there's a point where, okay, we're going to do this for 5 years and then have the possibility to renew after that, or we're going to do this for 3 years and then look at renewing after that, then I'd look at like using that 3 year mark, right? Or that 5 year mark as the kind of end date for the purposes of the innovation grant program. But yes, we hope that these go long term. Absolutely.
We'll take one more and then we'll open it up to folks who are working on a application or have something to offer to their peers. It's an interesting question. Would unlibraried towns, that's a new one, qualify for a portion of the amount that their taxpayers pay, even though they currently do not have a contract when they move forward to join to a joint library system under a new contract? So it sounds like they don't have a library, they're not performing that service, or they're not participating in that. Although
Yeah, that's a new term for me, unlibraried.
they don't have a library, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that the first pillar of are you providing the service in the year prior to the transfer? I think in this scenario, this wouldn't qualify because it sounds like you don't have a library, you're not paying for the library service. So it sounds like the municipality is not funding or providing that service right now via contract or themselves. So I think in that scenario, it wouldn't pass pillar one.
Great. Okay, so the time we've got remaining today, Valia, I just want to hit those pillars one more time for the sake of summarization.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we are looking at, I'm stopping to my share. I'm back here. Okay. So what we're going to be looking at, pillar one, is your county, municipality, or tribe. Are you providing the service in the calendar year before the transfer? Pillar two, is it an allowable service or duty that's being transferred? And then pillar three, is it going to an eligible entity? So are you transferring that service to an eligible entity, which would be another county, municipality, tribe, nonprofit, or private entity? So those are our three things. And when I receive these scenarios, I'm like, okay, pillar one, pillar two, pillar three. That's how I kind of quickly evaluate whether it would pass.
Awesome. I'm going to stop the recording